Hi, everybody. Welcome to Legacy Stories. It's Maria here today, and I have a special guest with me. It is my friend Priya, who went through life coach certification last year with me. We had so much fun together, and I'm so happy to have her on the podcast finally. Priya, introduce yourself. Tell us
Hi,
a little bit about you.
hi, Maria. I'm glad to be here. I am Priya. I'm a certified coach through the Life Coach School. I certified with Maria, and before that, I'm a physician. I came to the United States in 2007 um, to start my residency here. I started my residency, and I've been working as a physician. And COVID changed a lot of things in healthcare. And that's when I learned about life coaching and started following the Life Coach School podcast and eventually got certified. That's my story.
That's amazing. But tell me more about how you decided to kind of come and live in US. What got you interested? It was 2007, right? You said
Mhm.
I came in 2005, so just a little bit before you. And I remember those times. There was no Skype.
Yes,
There was not a lot of things that today people have when they move here. So what got you interested into coming here at that time?
true. What actually brought me to US was my ex-husband. When I got married, which I grew up in India, he grew up in India also. I had an arranged marriage, and he was living in England at that time. He is a physician too. So from England, we decided to move to the United States because medical healthcare opportunities are better here. Definitely, healthcare is better here than the United Kingdom. So that is what got us coming to the United States. So I moved
Wait,
with
I'm like, I have so many questions. So you grew up in
yeah,
India. Up to what age did you live in India?
22.
22. Okay. And then you and your then husband moved to England up to 2007, right? So you spent a couple of
Yeah,
years in
so he
England too.
already he got married. Yes. So I moved to England in 2005, right after my marriage. And from 2005 to June 2007, we lived in England. And July 1st of 2007, we moved to United States.
Wow, that's cool actually. Okay, so how did you like England compared to US?
Oh, definitely US is so much better. The weather. They don't even have like a full blown summer. Even in summer, it's cold, and so definitely the weather was a big change when I moved to the US. I loved it, and I loved the diversity of the United States. In England, I did, at least where we lived, I did not see such a diverse population.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That
Mhm.
definitely makes sense, especially if you're somebody who's coming here kind of in a medical field and you end up in a bigger hospital, bigger area, bigger city, you're going to see a lot more diversity.
Oh, yeah.
I actually wanted, my dream was to go study Cambridge or Oxford. I loved all those old buildings, all those stories and books
Hmm.
you get
Hmm.
to read as you're growing up. And I had a friend who, after the war, she was a translator for the British forces, and she ended up marrying a soldier and moving to England. And one thing she always complained about was the weather. And I'm like, I don't know if I could live there just because of the weather, but man, those places seem so cool. So I'm always like fascinated a little bit extra with England.
Yes, it's a nice place to visit. I would visit in summer for a couple months, but living throughout the year definitely made a huge thing. The weather definitely had a huge impact.
Wow. Okay.
It's a lot of days, so
Now, immigrating at 22, I think I was nine. So basically, we're like really close in age. I'm like, immigrating at that age, I remember how it was. Um, Now, you were in a little bit of a different situation, being married at that age. It's a little bit different. I came by myself, but I remember all the thirst. I don't know if it's kind of India same, like I just know that there were so many resources in US, and I just wanted to do everything and wanted to be everywhere, and like especially like at school I'm talking about, in college, like I wanted to join all the groups, do all the things, because it was just like, this is available. This
Mm.
is real. I'm like, how was that like period when you came to US for residency for you? How was that different?
Definitely, I agree with the overwhelmed feeling that you had. So, I was. Because I already completed my medical school in India, I could have I could kindly somewhat narrow because I wasn't going to change my basic degree. So, but then after that, to choose into what specialty I want to go, that was a huge dilemma because I in fact when I moved to the United States, I had applied to multiple specialties, and I got into a family medicine residency program. So I accepted it, but I applied to pediatrics, psychiatry, internal medicine, all kinds of specialties. So definitely there was so much opportunities that can be overwhelming. Yes. Also, like you said, even while I was in residency, you could do these multiple extra courses and stuff, and definitely I wanted to do everything, which practically was not possible. So I had to narrow it down and say, hey, just focus on one thing, get this done, get through with this. So yeah, that I agree with that feeling. Yes.
Okay, you said arranged marriage.
Ah.
Um, right. So I know about this, like everybody knows about this. And I know my grandparents' generation back
Mm,
home did that a lot. For example, my mom's mom, she really liked somebody. However, my grandpa
mm,
was married and his wife died while giving birth to my first aunt. And her family pushed her into marrying him. He
mm,
was not that older, but a little bit older than her. So she
mm,
ended up, and like there was a lot of these things where like it wasn't like officially like an arranged marriage, but it was like that was basically it. And I was always like, oh, like in this age, we have this whole story about romance, this whole story about that. And I'm like, how is that? How was it for you?
that's totally different. It can be another podcast day. Yes. Arranged marriages are still common in India. And so my parents got together with my ex husband's parents, and they see how the family is, how what kind of education he has, and have some criteria. And we also go by a horoscope, which is like astrological, you know birth date based information. They just try to match that, and then if they like the family and they like everything else about the family, then they say, yes, we would like to have I have our daughter married to your son, and that's our engagement, and then go into an arranged marriage. So I did not even meet my ex-husband before the engagement. So at the day of our engagement was the first day I met, because he was in England at that time. So he flew down to India. We met one day and got engaged, and then after a year we got married. So there's a lot of definitely, what to say, uncertainties, because you want to get to know the person, and you know try to have a living relationship, marriage. But in my case, it did not work out. But there are a lot of success stories. So
Yeah, no, I
that's
mean,
arranged marriage in short.
yeah. What I know of it is like I just remember saying like, hey, they're really rich, as in like they have a lot of cows and a lot of land. So this man is a good opportunity. And I'm like, okay, this sounds already better. There's like at least horoscope involved. There's some kind of matching. It's not just the number of cows and land. Which, but I get it also. It was the age when people were trying to survive. You were trying to make sure that your kids were well off, as in like, hey, they had food. But it was
Mm,
a very different times, and it was so close. This is my grandmother I'm talking about. But I'm wondering
yeah.
if it was, since when you grow up in the culture where it's happening, it's not so um foreign, right? Because it's like you see it around you. It's not like, oh my God, this is happening. It's a normal thing. Did your husband grow up in
Yes.
ex-husband grow up in England, or did he grew up in India too?
He grew up in India too, so he was familiar with the arranged marriage system too. So that
Mm.
was us. So all of my cousins, of course, my parents, my grandparents, everybody had the arranged marriage. So even so, people would be like exactly like you said, cows and lands. So in your age, when you're a physician, when you're in medical school, how did that happen? I mean, like all of my medical school colleagues, maybe except a handful who chose their own partners, except them, 90% of my colleagues also had the arranged marriage. So at least my parents had this criteria, not cows and lands this time. We'll have somebody who's a physician. Okay, so who has gone through medical school too. So that way he will be an equal partner to my daughter. So that's how they
Mm.
started. His profile came up and they matched us.
Oh, that's. But see, in our culture right now, living in this country here, we have a lot of Serbian and Macedonian people living here, and my husband is
Mm-hmm.
Macedonian. We met here. But what happens a lot of time is when you grow up in a culture in this country with your people, you know everybody. So what happens is like
Mm-hmm.
the girls and boys who are growing up together at the same time here, they kind of become like family. They know each other really well. So our kids here end up either marrying Americans. Rarely do they marry each other unless they're like kind of for some reason unfamiliar with each other. Rarely do they otherwise marry each other, or they do this thing where people keep going back home for summers, for vacations, and the ones that are going back home, they'll fall in love and they'll just marry somebody from over there. And to me, it's not an arranged marriage because, right, you
Mm-hmm.
went and you fell in love, but it's also that thing that you said, you don't get to spend any time with that person. You literally go, you meet them, you fall in love.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, different people do things differently. Some people spend time together, some don't. But the thing that catches on for me there is like, you have grown up in two different cultures. Of course, it depends on the person here and person there, how much they're similar or not. Sometimes mostly it's a great click, but then sometimes people end the marriage because it's totally different. Like you're bringing up, it's like you have nothing in common for the first whatever 20, 30 years of your life. And you bring the person here and they're totally like opposite of what you are, and you have no like connection to, like, if you're, especially if the kids are brought up more American here than more like in our culture. So like you haven't listened to the music they listened, you didn't watch the movies they did, or like it's like just the basic, and sometimes that really can mess people up.
True, I agree. But in my case, we grew up in a similar way, and that was the connecting factor because we had similar beliefs, similar upbringing. Like you said, movies, music. All our childhood faces were very similar. So that's the connecting factor, and I think that's why even though he actually had not living, he was not living in England for too long of a time. He had just graduated and moved to England maybe a year or two before I got married to him. So until at that point, he was in India, grew up very similarly like how I did. So that was the reason my parents thought, okay, this would be good because eventually my daughter can too immigrate along with him and move wherever he wants. So that's how we got married.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really great stories and some don't. And of course, even people who marry for love, sometimes things fall apart. And as you know, as a coach, sometimes it's just our thinking that causes the things to fall apart. And sometimes there's like things that, and sometimes you're thinking, how if I knew about this thought work, maybe this would have worked out. And sometimes it's like, no, actually, it's fine that it ended. So things have purpose in life. And it's just very interesting learning about the cultures and about the customs. And, people go through different
True.
things.
You brought up a very good point. I've been divorced for about 11 years now. To getting certified, I have had a lot of thoughts about what if I had the coaching tools then? Would my marriage survived or would I have stayed with him? Or sometimes I would think that way, and other times I would think, I think regardless, this is the path I was supposed to take, and this is how it was supposed to be. It's for the best for both of us. And I've had both thoughts. I couldn't really pinpoint to one or the other. So I've had that kind of thoughts too. What if I had the coaching tools then?
And it's like it is what it is. It's happened what happened.
It was,
But how is
yeah.
it now being how like for in your culture? My grandmother said once, if any of my kids gets divorced, and keep in
Mm,
mind, I lost two uncles. I have two uh, two of my mom's siblings are not married, and then there's two of them that are married. So she's talking about it as if all of her six kids, plus my aunt that was not her kid, but is kind of her kid, like all of seven of them. If one of them gets divorced, she said she would hang herself. It would be such a shame in front of the village. And she's dead serious. I think every person in that village would literally like want to kill themselves and would not leave the house if their child got divorced because that's such a shame. And I'm like,
mm.
how is it for you to be divorced coming from India? How do people look at that right now?
Right now, in this day and age, things have changed in India too. So the divorce rates have gone up, and women are independent. That's all. That also comes from women being more educated. So they are independent. They can survive on their own. They don't really need to be in America. Really, but I would say when I got divorced 11 years ago, things were a little different. And one part of me said, like, I came to the United States because of my husband. Do I want to stay here or go back to India? But definitely there was a lot of shame and cultural taboos involved at that time, 11 years ago. So that is also the reason I decided to stay as a single mom here. I have a child, so it was difficult, but as a single mom, I said I would be better off living in the United States than moving to India. So definitely it was then. But I think now, after 10 years, definitely things have changed a whole lot. People are more accepting. I don't think there's as much of a shame, at least in the bigger cities. I do not know about smaller villages and smaller areas, but definitely in the cities, I think people are more accepting, and it does not make a difference.
Okay. Yeah, I think again, I'm talking about my grandmother. I'm sure none of my parents
Hmm,
would hang themselves out of shape or anything, right? But there's still people, and it still exists, and it's a different kind of a generation who grew up with different kind of upbringing, and they have different kind of beliefs than we do. And yeah, no, this is a
absolutely.
really good conversation. I just wanna so being an immigrant for you,
Hmm.
what do you love about being an immigrant? Like, what is like one thing that you're like, oh, I'm so happy I wasn't born in this country and that I brought this with me?
Definitely my values. Growing up in India, definitely there were a lot of morals and values instilled in us. Um, I always feel that is my authentic self. Like, you know, simple things like that I try to teach my son, and that's what I brought from there. So I'll tell you a simple example, like wasting food. I really get worried when people waste food here. I was no, so I grew up in southern India, and southern India, our staple food was primarily rice. And my parents, when growing up, have taught me values like each grain of rice has the name written, who it belongs to. Like you can't waste food like because God has already written how much you get. That's just an example of what you will get in life. Whatever is the wealth, the prosperity, all that you get is already written. God kind of decides. So food is really considered divine, and it's God's offering. So when people waste food, I really don't like it, and I try to teach that to my son. And that was one example. So all these values that I learned growing up is the most treasured possession I have. That's what I really love, bringing it from India while living here.
Okay. And what's something that you're like, oh dear God, why did I get this?
While
Like, why do I have to have this? And
it,
it comes from
absolutely,
there.
yeah, same. So, you know, fear of uh, fear is big. I am not outspoken, I'm not an extrovert, and I think that comes from growing up in India, also in a very conservative society. You're not allowed to, I won't say allowed, you're not, let's say allowed, you're not allowed to express your opinions like here. You have to, certain things you can't say in a crowd, even though it may be the right thing, you can't say certain things. So I've
Mm.
learned, in a way, I would have a sentence in my mind first, and I'd be like, is this appropriate to be said here? Most of the time it's no. And that's like a cultural conditioning that I grew up with, and I brought that also here. So I see here in my workplace, when people in a meeting, they blurt out whatever they want, but I don't do that. I'm like thinking about it like at least 10 times before I even say something. So that makes me not so expressive. So that is something I brought from my growing up in India, which I should not have.
Yeah, it's it's the mixture of our brain and our socialization. And I know for us, the shame, again, the shame is big. And it's like a lot of things are shameful. And my main thing that I always notice is like, I don't want to shame my kids, but even when you're not shaming them, you're shaming them. And you're like, shit, like I'm doing this work. But that's the thing. It's so deeply ingrained in you that you
True.
don't even see it. And it's like, oh my God. But it's literally like it was told to you 10 times a day. So
Mm-hmm.
you just you really absorb it. What
True.
I want to ask. So being an immigrant mom and having you have a boy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
Okay. So how is that? Being an immigrant mom, how is it? I see with my own kids, because they're growing up in totally different world than I was. And even if they were growing up back there, let's be honest, these are totally different time. They're totally different generation. So it's like,
Mhm.
how is it being in US and having a boy by
Okay.
yourself?
By myself. Definitely good question. So, yes, it has been a learning experience. That's how I would like to put it. Every day is new. So, even the school system, his friends, definitely there's a lot of difference. So, I am learning, and I try to teach him the values that I brought from India, at the same time, not, you know, giving this fear and that conditioning that I brought from India. So I try to get the best of both worlds for him. That's how I look at it. Let's take this. Oh, let's leave that behind. Though I learned it when I was a child, I don't think I should teach that to him. But sometimes, like you said, certain things we tell them, it automatically gets that fear and shame cycle. But I try not to do that. But consciously, when I'm like really thinking about it and staying more conscious, what I want for him is best of both worlds. I try to get the good values and, morals that I've learned, but at the same time absorb all the freedom, liberty that the United States has to give them.
It's beautiful. I love that. You look at that. I'm gonna try and adopt that. I'm just learning. I have one more question that I
It,
think is fabulous.
just to add to that, I after the life coach certification, I have just gained more awareness of that. That's what I would say. So it has helped me. Oh my God, I'm saying this, and he's interpreting it this way. Oh wow, just that awareness has helped a lot.
You can see his models clearly. Yes. No, it helps. It helps so much. Um, One more question I want to ask. How are you connected to India through community or through, how are you connected to India now?
Now, definitely, I have a huge Indian community in St. Louis where I live, and we have all Indian festivals. There's a Hindu cultural center and a temple where I go to regularly, pretty regularly, at least once a month. So I'm connected to the community. We try to celebrate all the Indian festivals, and that is also a way of telling our next generation about the cultures and the customs. So my son gets to learn about all the Indian festivals and the reason behind and why we do certain things and all that kind of stuff. And he is also enrolled in a it's called Bal Bihar. It's a cultural school for young kids.
Does he know the language?
He can speak, he can write or read, but he can manage, I think.
Mm, yeah. No, no, that's good. Sometimes when they're at that stage, I think if they're growing up and they have this desire to go back, that
Mhm.
is plenty, because the second you immerse them in that culture, they just bloom at once. They just take it all in, and it's just, of course you don't get the subtleties of it right away, but it's really easy for kids to adjust. I've seen kids adjusting to English wonderfully, and I've
Mhm.
also seen kids adjusting to going back and just adjusting to the language there. Like all they need is like summer, literally. Their minds are still growing, and it's amazing.
Speaking of which, he is right now in India spending the summer with his grandparents. And yes, he is enjoying it there. And, he's talking to everybody there. He can manage.
That's awesome. That's so good. Priya, thank you so much. This was such a good episode.
Thank you.
Do you want to say anything else for the ending?
Ah,
Okay, thank you. Um, I think you cut off, but I think you said you enjoyed it. Oh, you can't hear me? Oops. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for being here. I hope you can hear me. And Priya was amazing. And I will talk to you guys next time. And yeah, thank you again, Priya.